Now, this might sound a little bit strange because obviously I am an investor and it does matter very much what the stock market is doing. But the truth is, no matter what happens, our strategies will be able to handle it. The stock market, it might go down further, who knows, we'll see, but it could also recover. 2 or 3 months from now, it could be back at all-time highs. Tariff policy, however, is a very long-term policy. If it's enacted well, it can be a boon for an economy. It can actually protect certain domestic industries and it can be great. But if it's rolled out poorly, or if it's executed badly and the whole world is shocked by all of it, then it can actually be a very damaging thing. So today we really do have to answer the very simple question of what are tariffs, and more specifically, who actually pays the tariff? If you just slap a big tariff on China, does that mean they just cut a check and send it to the United States? Is it as easy as that? Well, turns out not so much. So I'm not sure how many of you remember this term from back in school, but we are facing a Thucydides trap. This is when a rising power threatens to displace a ruling power, and the resulting structural stress makes an economic or military clash the rule, not the exception. So of course, what we're talking about here, the ruling power being the United States, the richest, most prosperous country, the rising power being China. There's a decent number of Americans who are under the impression that China is some backwards third world country that's just going to collapse in on itself. You are entitled to your opinion, but take it from somebody who has actually lived in Asia for over 20 years now. I can assure you that's not true. Now, they definitely have headwinds, I'm not saying that, but the truth is, all you have to do is just get on an airplane, go to one of the modern cities in China like Shenzhen. You might actually go back to the United States thinking, why can't we even fix basic potholes? And here's China building mega cities and super projects. But neither here nor there. The solution from the Trump administration has been to attack this problem, this Thucydides trap, through tariffs. Now, don't let it fool you. Of course, there's a whole list of countries that this is going to affect, but really they are targeting just the top 2. This is really just a ploy to steer China and the European Union in a certain direction. All of the rest of them will, of course, be forced to bend the knee to Trump. He's going to win in respect to 98% of these places. But the deal was that they're going to slap massive, in quotes, reciprocal tariffs. Now, I did a whole live stream talking about how that's kind of a ridiculous concept. They ended up using a pretty silly formula here, trying to pass it off as this was some master plan, when in actual fact it's just a dirt simple formula basically explaining a trade imbalance. This could all be done in 4 seconds on the back of a napkin while watching a baseball game with 7 beers in your stomach. But if you are curious what I mean by the tariff rates, you can see that before all of this started, it was actually pretty reasonable. Most countries are in the low to mid single digits of actual tariffs that they apply to the US. Trade imbalances are good. It means America can actually maintain its super high standard of living. Tariffs themselves are just meant to protect certain domestic industries, which I would support, by the way. I'm not anti-Trump and I'm not anti-tariff. It isn't a very good idea to go through this Thucydides trap knowing that your main enemy is also the source of some of your manufacturing. So I would actually be perfectly fine if they wanted to just target 1 or 2 specific industries and start protecting it. Anything related to AI, I would have no problem if the United States tried to move that back. Devastating global blanket tariffs when the original ones were low to mid single digits just makes no sense and it causes panic. Hence the stock market. It's selling off because people who really do know what's going on don't make any sense of this. But let's just clear this up because it's really not that complicated. First of all, let's just say we're talking about just China and the US. Because like I said, that's really what this is all about. A little bit the European Union, but mostly China. So let's say at the end of all of this, the 34%, the additional 50%, all of this escalation, it actually turns out to just be 25%. Now remember, that's actually very significant because China actually only had tariffs on the US in the single digits. So going to 25 is astronomically high. The last time we tried this experiment, the world went into a global depression and it took 20 years for the stock market to recover. This is a very, very big deal economically. So what is the net effect of this? Well, let's just go through a basic example. A US company imports a $1,000 widget. Now, I'm using the word widget just generally here. Any $1,000 item that goes from China to the United States now has a 25% tariff. So what is the net result of that? Does it really mean that China just cuts a check to the US and we can start paying down our massive debt? Well, not really, because the one thing that I want everybody to understand with this entire process, the US company pays that tariff. China does not cut a check to the United States. The American company does at the port of entry. So if it's a 25% tariff on a $1,000 widget, say Ford, for example, imports something for $1,000, China doesn't pay it, Ford Motor Company pays it. You're not sticking it to China, you're sticking it to American companies. Now, it is true that the US government gets that money, so if this is some ploy to raise capital to pay down the debt, well, at the very least, they got this part right. That port of entry, of course, is a government agency of some kind, and that money does go to the United States. But now we have a problem, don't we? Because Ford Motor Company, now their profit margin is going to be lower. You got to remember that even in the example of Ford, one of the most American of American companies, let's just say half of their inputs are actually imported. So now Ford Motor Company has a lower profit margin because of the tariffs, right? They had to pay that out of their pocket. Now I say X% here because it might not be 25. If they literally did import a fully built vehicle and sold it in the United States, it would be a 25% profit loss. But let's just say it's roughly 50% of their input variables that's being tariffed. Well, in that case, we would have a 12.5% loss of profit margin. Now, spoiler alert, that would be devastating for most American companies. The vast majority of companies out there have single-digit profit margins, so 12.5% would be devastating. So what could they do? They have a few options. Number one, and by far most likely, they would just raise their prices to absorb the lost profit. If it turns out to be 12.5%, they would just raise their prices by 12.5%. So that would mean that a vehicle that costs $50,000, it would now cost $56,250. That roughly $6,000 is just the cost of doing business in a more expensive market now. Ford would pass that on to the consumers. We would see massive inflation. But they do have a few other choices. They could also just buy widgets from US-based companies and bypass this whole 25% tariff, right? This is what the administration wants you to believe is going to happen. Now, the problem here is there is actually a reason why companies like Ford already import from other countries. It's because those inputs either don't exist in the United States, which is most common, or if they do exist, because labor costs 5 times more and leasing land and buying land for your factories costs 5 times more, and you have to pay employee benefits and Social Security and healthcare, and then the supply chains, everything in the United States is more expensive, the railways are more expensive, the road systems, the energy, the electricity, it's all more expensive. So it's not as easy as just saying, oh cool, we'll just buy from US-based companies. In many cases, they don't exist, and in the other cases that they do exist, it is far more expensive, and that in itself is going to be a very high profit margin loss for Ford Motor Company. And then the other thing to consider is, I know a lot of Americans do think that Asia is a third world area, but the truth is they actually do manufacture very high quality products in certain situations. Obviously, America is also good as well, I'm not saying that, but the reason that Ford also imports a lot of stuff, even though they're American, is because the rest of the world does have high quality in many situations. Now, the third thing that they could do is they could actually bring back their own manufacturing entirely back to the United States and just build everything in-house. If what they need doesn't exist, well, they'll build it themselves. Well, again, you've got a massive problem with this. Everything in the United States is several multiples more expensive. What are the odds that American companies want to bring back their manufacturing, which will end up costing them, let's say, 100% or more just to avoid a 25% tariff? The truth is, the tariffs at 25% are already insanely high, but they would have to be in the order of hundreds of percent to make it financially feasible to cover that cost. Building in the US is insanely expensive. And that's great news for Americans because it is a reflection of your high standard of living. It is a reflection that Americans are living the good life. That's why it would cost these companies a fortune to go back to the US. That is a good thing. This is what trade partners are for. This is what Mexico is for. Manufacturing is cheaper there. This is what having relationships with the European Union and Canada is for. I agree, doing all of this with China is probably not a good idea if the world is escalating this Thucydides trap. But building it in-house is just bad economics. And then you also have to factor in business uncertainty. Love him or hate him, Trump changes policy literally weekly. I tweeted recently that under the current conditions, I don't think I'd be confident opening a lemonade stand in the United States, let alone bringing back billions of dollars in foreign manufacturing. For all you know, you get a quarter way through that process and Trump just flips the chessboard upside down and changes all the rules again. This is not going to happen until we have massive clarity. So all of this is to say that option 1, raise prices, or option 4, or declare bankruptcy and close your company, this is very likely where this is all going. It might surprise you to know that there's actually 33 million companies in the United States, and over half of them are very small businesses. Everybody likes to use the example, and I'm doing it as well, using things like Ford, using things like Tesla. But the truth is, if you have a small business that has 3 employees, you simply don't have the luxury to do any of this and absorb those costs. Your profit margin is probably single digit. You probably don't have any factories yourself on foreign soil. You literally cannot afford to take that profit margin hit from the tariff, and you just simply close your company. This policy, as it's been rolled out, and unless it is just basically entirely walked back, you're going to be in a situation where millions of businesses are forced to shut their doors. What are the odds that Trump wins the midterm elections if there's massive inflation and 15 million US companies go out of business? A lot of this is trying to be passed off as, this is really good for America because we'll be able to A, bring back manufacturing, and B, we're going to be able to pay off this debt because these countries are now going to have to stop taking advantage of the US and start sending money back to us. But as I've showed, that's not actually what happens. You're actually sticking it to the American companies and you're sticking it to the American consumer. That's what's actually happening. So you have to understand the end result of all of this is that, yeah, maybe you raise a little bit of capital, but you're going to destroy your own economy. You stubbed your toe, and the solution to the problem is you're going to cut off your whole leg. That's what's going on here. So as I said, the stock market itself obviously is being decimated. This is a problem. Even if you hold 0 stocks, is still pivotal in a lot of the social safety nets that we have out there, a lot of the pension funds, all of this global consumption and everything leads to basically companies, right? That is everything. So the stock market's super, super important. But like I said, I want people to start viewing this through the lens of, let's say the stock market does get back to all-time highs 3 months from now. That still doesn't mean that this policy is working. It's going to be passed off as that. They're going to roll it out and they're going to claim victory every chance they get, but that's not what it actually means. The damage is done, this is terrible, and I want people to start thinking about it logically. If you, business owner in the United States, how is it even feasibly possible for you to come back to the US and start manufacturing and actually make any money? You're sticking it to the businesses in America and you're sticking it to the consumers in America. I would celebrate your prosperity in America and find better ways to pay off your debt, to find better ways to lower interest rates, to find better ways to maintain your global dominance. I am a big fan of the US. I love the US. This is not it. So now you can check out this video, which goes over all 4 strategies in the total portfolio solution. From there, you can weigh which one best suits your own level of risk tolerance. I'm more the conservative type, but if you are a little bit more aggressive, that's totally fine. And the absolute return portfolio is going to be perfect for you. See you next time.